around the world. Welcome to this session of Discover the Power of Blockchain. I'm the moderator for the online segment, Chen. Usually I anchor the business shows on CGTN. And of course, we do have two fabulous guests today to share their thoughts on blockchain with us. Eric Maskin, Nobel laureate, who's joining us from Boston, and of course, Professor Chen, Academic Director at Luohan Academy, joining us from Hangzhou, China. What can blockchain do, and what is its fundamental edge?
Well, thanks very much. I wanted to talk for a little while today about blockchain, and in particular, its connection to cryptocurrency, which is the best known application so far. Let me start with the positive news about blockchain. In my view, it's one of the most exciting and possibly transformative technologies around these days. In applications that have already been developed, it allows you to transfer money easily and cheaply and securely and quickly from one end of the world to another. You don't need an intermediary for that. You don't need a bank. You don't need to know anything about the person who's receiving the money, including that person's identity, and he doesn't need to know anything about you. So you really don't need to trust one another to have completely secure transactions. This is a milestone in the development of markets. We started having a market economy system several hundred years ago, and this developed because it made it possible for people who don't know each other very well to trade. Before that, if you wanted to exchange goods with someone, you had to know something about them. You had to trust them. The market economy made it possible to have exchange without so much trust, and blockchain takes this one step further. People don't really need to know anything about one another. They don't need to know their identities. They don't even have to know where the other person is located geographically. And importantly, blockchain can be used for many purposes in addition to transferring money. It can be used for sharing sensitive information, such as medical records, because blockchain makes it possible, if I want to share my medical record with you, that you get to see only the parts of the record that are relevant to you. And furthermore, I can ensure that only people who are supposed to get the record at all get access. So that's an important feature. Blockchain can be used for voting. If we have a public corporation and we want to conduct elections for the board of directors, we can do this online using blockchain with total security. It will be possible for voters to check after the election has occurred to make sure that the votes were counted properly. You don't need to trust whoever the official vote counter is. It can be used for shipping and logistics. For example, suppose I'm a company and I want to ship my goods someplace in the world. I can use blockchain to make sure that the right ship out of all of the many ships on the ocean is the one that is assigned to do the shipping for me. And I can make sure that only that ship and not other ships learn about my company's goods and the destination that I want to send those goods. In other words, I can preserve privacy. It can be used for electrical power distribution. If there are many different sources of electricity, we can use blockchain to make sure that my house gets access to the cheapest, most efficient form of electricity at any given time. let me give you an illustration of how blockchain can be very useful. And I'm going to give an illustration from the field of mechanism design, which is my particular specialty. So every firm will bid exactly what the resource is worth to that firm, and that guarantees that the winning firm will be the firm that values the resource the most. So we've solved the problem from a mechanism design point of view. However, in reality, firms may not want to publicly reveal their values because, after all, they're bidding against their competitors. And if they reveal their values publicly, they're giving their competitors valuable information that they don't want their competitors to have. So we would like is a system where we can have the high bidder pay the second highest bid, but without revealing what those bids were publicly. And that's where blockchain comes in. Blockchain can guarantee that there's a way for the winning firm to check without anything being public what the second highest bid was. So the winner can check to make sure that it's paying the right amount. And the losing firms can check to make sure that they have been outbid without knowing what the winning bidder's actual bid was. So blockchain solves all of the privacy problems involved in a mechanism design problem. We can arrange the mechanism so that nobody knows what the value for the winning bidder was, except, of course, the winning bidder itself. So this is an important step forward in mechanism design because it means that we can carry out mechanisms like the one I've shown you in a privacy-preserving way. All of the data that firms want to keep private can be kept private. So all of this is very good news. And as I said, I'm very positive about the technology itself. But so far, the most famous application of blockchain has been to cryptocurrency, like Bitcoin. And as I will explain, I have very severe reservations about Bitcoin. The first question we have to ask about Bitcoin or other newly created cryptocurrencies is what benefit is it bringing that we didn't already have? After all, before Bitcoin, we had money of various forms. We had dollars and euros and RMB. What does Bitcoin add? Why do we need another? Well, one possible answer to that question is that it's not as easy to transfer the old-fashioned money as it is to transfer Bitcoin. And that's certainly true. However, there's no reason why we can't apply the same technology that is used for Bitcoin, blockchain, for old-fashioned money. And in fact, there are many places in the world today where central banks have created digital currency like Bitcoin, but it's not private money like Bitcoin. It's public money, but in a digital form. It appears that we can duplicate the benefits of Bitcoin for perfectly ordinary fiat money by creating a digital version of that money, the money created by the government. In fact, there are a number of ways in which old-fashioned money, government-created money, is better than Bitcoin. One serious problem with Bitcoin that we've seen is that there have been huge swings in its value, speculative swings. It goes up and down quite dramatically in value. That's a disadvantage if you're an ordinary investor. If you want to be able to predict the value of your portfolio, it's very hard to do that if you own a lot of Bitcoin. It's not so hard to do that if you own the RMB or the dollar. So speculators might like Bitcoin, but ordinary investors not so much. Furthermore, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are often used for illegal transactions. It's harder to do that with ordinary government-backed money, which is regulated. Also, ordinary money is liquid in a way that cryptocurrencies are not. By liquid, I mean that it can be used for a very wide range of transactions. If you have RMB or dollars, you can buy almost any good you want. There are relatively few goods that you can buy with Bitcoin because most people won't accept Bitcoin in exchange for their goods. And this defeats a major purpose of money. Money was invented in large part to make the exchange of goods easier. Before we had money, if I had apples and I wanted to acquire some of your oranges, it would be necessary for you to want my apples in exchange for trade to occur. And we'd have to be lucky if I wanted your oranges and you wanted my apples at the same time. That's what's called a double coincidence of wants. And for a world without money, that's what you need in order for exchange to occur. Money solves this problem because if I have money and I want some of your oranges, I don't have to give you apples, which you don't want. I can give you money instead. And you're willing to accept this money because you know that you can use it later to buy the goods that you want. Money has vastly improved the exchangeability of goods, but in Bitcoin, we're moving back in the wrong direction because Bitcoin is not so liquid. You cannot use it to buy oranges. And to the extent that people are using Bitcoin rather than old-fashioned money, we're moving backwards. Now, so far, let me just make one other point along these lines. If I want to buy your oranges with US dollars, for example, by law, I'm allowed to do that because if you look at a US banknote, it says that this banknote is legal tender for all debts, public and private. That means that the government requires you, orange seller, to accept my dollar for your oranges. There is no similar requirement for Bitcoin. You don't have to accept my Bitcoin if you don't want to. So that's another reason why using RMB or using dollars makes trade easier because the government is backing the money. Well, so far I've explained why old-fashioned money is actually superior to cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, so long as we have digital versions of ordinary money. But I want to go a step farther and explain why a world with cryptocurrency can actually make things worse. And there are two ways in which things can become worse than before once cryptocurrency is introduced. The first has to do with monetary policy. Since the early 20th century, responsible governments have used monetary policy as an important policy tool in fighting inflation. So the idea is that if we're in a recession and the economy is struggling, the government or the central bank can increase the money supply. And the reason it does this is to make getting credit easier for firms and entrepreneurs can carry out productive projects which expand output and expand employment and help lift the economy out of recession. When the economy is doing very well, when it's booming, the government or the central bank does just the opposite. If the economy is booming, there's a danger of inflation. And to prevent inflation from taking over, the central bank can try to contract the money supply. In fact, monetary policy has been extremely important in recent history. If you look at the Great Recession of 2007, 2008, in the US and in Europe and in China, central banks conducted this counter-cyclical monetary policy that I was talking about, and that was very important to preventing a deep depression. People were worried that we were going to have a repeat of the 1930s. And we very well might have had a repeat of the 1930s with a quarter of the labor force out of work and a 10-year recession. But we were saved from that by the Federal Reserve in the US, the European Central Bank in Europe, and the Chinese Central Bank. All of these banks took corrective action, increased the money supply, and fortunately, despite a serious recession, there was relatively quick recovery. Here's the problem with cryptocurrency. If people are using cryptocurrency rather than ordinary money, the central bank's monetary policy is no longer as effective. It's critically important that when the central bank increases the money supply, say, that this is valuable for people. They're using this money. That's why monetary policy is effective. If people are using private money like Bitcoin, then monetary policy no longer matters, and we lose a very important tool to fight recessions. So that's the first major problem with cryptocurrency. The other problem has to do with banking. Now, supporters of cryptocurrency sometimes say, well, if we have cryptocurrency, we don't need banks anymore, because if I want to transfer money to you, I don't have to go through a bank. And that's true. With cryptocurrency, you don't need to use banks, but that comment ignores the most important role of banks, which is not to act as an intermediary for money transfers, but the most important thing that banks do is to make loans to entrepreneurs. People deposit their money in banks, and then the banks turn around and they use that money to make loans to entrepreneurs. So let me explain very quickly how that system works. We have entrepreneurs who have good ideas for new products, new technology, but typically the entrepreneurs don't have enough funding to create these new goods themselves. So they need money. And where do they go? Well, they go to banks. Banks have some money. And furthermore, they have through experience, the capacity to evaluate ideas. So they can lend money to entrepreneurs who have good ideas, and they will refrain from lending money to entrepreneurs who don't have good ideas. Now let's imagine that instead of regular money, we're using cryptocurrency without banks. Well, who is going to make the loans to entrepreneurs now? There are two possibilities. One possibility is that we have something like crowdfunding. You're probably all familiar with crowdfunding, where I'm an entrepreneur, I advertise online that I have this project, and then people can invest in me. The problem with crowdfunding, though, is that typically the people who invest don't really know very much. about the project they're investing in. They may invest in something good, they may be investing in something bad. Actually, most of the time it's something bad. And so the problem with crowdfunding is that there are too many bad ideas and not enough good ideas that get funded this way. I'm not saying that crowdfunding is itself a bad idea, but a bank, which is a specialist in making loans, can typically do a better job. So if we're in a cryptocurrency world without banks, we would expect that there will be some new institution that develops, like a bank, that can evaluate projects. But the problem with these new institutions is that, like banks, these institutions will want to make leveraged loans. If you have leverage without regulation, the economy can get into big trouble. Let me explain how that can happen. Because of leverage, we had a chain reaction of failures. If an entrepreneur failed, the original bank would get into trouble, but then it couldn't repay the other banks that it borrowed from, so they got into trouble. And then they couldn't repay the banks they had borrowed from. And so we had a chain reaction of failures. This is what is called systemic risk. Leverage leads to systemic risk. In an ordinary banking, we can control how much leverage we have by regulation. And in fact, since the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, we've had quite a lot of good regulation put in place. In the US, we had the Dodd-Frank Act. In Europe, we had the Basel rules. But if we're in a cryptocurrency world, there's no regulation. And so it's very hard to protect ourselves from a serious financial crisis because it allows secure transactions with privacy preservation. But private cryptocurrency is not such a good idea. And I hope I've given you enough reasons for you to understand why I say that. So here is the sort of future that I would like to see. I think most money should continue to be created by the governments. It can be digital, central bank digital currency, that's fine. And that actually makes life easier because digital currency is easier to, it's safer and it's easier to transfer. But private cryptocurrency, like Bitcoin, should not play more than a small role in the future economy, as far as I'm concerned. We should take steps to make sure it doesn't expand beyond a small fraction of the economy. I think it's important that government should continue to be able to use monetary policy to fight recessions and to fight inflation, and that banks should continue to be the primary funders for entrepreneurial projects. And blockchain is going to make all of this much easier and more secure than it used to be. As I said, blockchain can also be used for many other purposes, many non-banking purposes, such as mechanism design.
Thanks so much, Professor Maskin, for shedding light on blockchain technology, your optimism for the technology itself, and also reservations about cryptocurrency. I just wanted to pick your brains about what fundamental changes this will actually bring, because you talked about what it's going to do for Dutch auctions and also in data privacy, sensitive data sharing. But you know, what's the transformative change in trust and data sharing that blockchain can bring to economic activities?
Well, as I said, markets developed in the first place because they allowed more people to transact with one another than was possible at a time when you had to know someone very well to be able to trade with them. And blockchain takes this to another level. Because you don't need to trust the person you're transacting with, because the technology itself will protect you, it becomes possible to trade with many more people than or many more firms than was previously possible. So it has the potential for greatly expanding the level of transactions, and therefore greatly expanding the output of the world. And when output goes up, we all benefit. That has been the secret of the great economic success that the world has enjoyed ever since the 19th century. The fact that output has gone up so dramatically.
I agree, fully agree with Eric that the most exciting future of blockchain is not a Bitcoin or just digital currency per se, but its huge potential to solve the trust problem. And so if we think about what digital technology has brought us so far, it makes the information so much cheaper, such that we connect to each other, we can trade with people thousands of kilometers away. It also provides so much more information so we can have the big data to make the smarter decisions. But I think then another wave that's coming, what we here to see is the possibility of the blockchain to solve the trust problem of the information. So, and in practice, I've seen, so I think especially, let me give one example in finance. So since Eric talked about the startups, the lack of the, precisely because of the lack of the information, just like Eric mentioned in this stock auction, we don't trust each other and we do not have enough information, so that the startups, usually they need money, they need resources, but they can never get it. The majority of the lending across the world is the collateral-based lending, because we don't trust each other, we just have used the collateral. And I don't trust you, but if you put $1,000 in my hand, I'm going to lend you, let's say $500, something like that. So that's like no-brainer lending because lack of trust and information. But now, so what we have, let me give you a concrete example in Ant Financial. So the Ant Financial in the past several years, we have lent to more than like 20 million SMEs, startups, without a penny of the collateral. And that's precisely because of the big data. So what we have seen is it's a tremendous potential, and put differently, information is a new collateral. But now let's imagine that actually information is not just more information, but it's actually much more trustworthy. And so that information, and you don't need to trust a particular body, so that information will be so much more powerful. And I think that that trust can circulate. And so a lot of startups can, supply chains, a lot of the people can get the financial support. They can to do much more things. So so that's something. So in my view, the bigger thing is not just the bigger potential of the blockchain is to solve the lack of, it's a trust problem. So we can call this, I would like to call this the digitization of trust. So we have digitization of information, we have digitization of the connectivity and big data. But now I think this wave, we're talking about the digitization of the trust. That's why recently Ant Group actually it proposed this Ant chain. So it's meant to, and the different ways to actually to improve trust. It's not just the blockchain, because just now I mentioned that even without blockchain, with the big data, and also let me give you another example. It's the rating. So on the platforms, there's billions of the commodities. Actually, the consumers come in to rate it, and so it's a very decentralized, you know. So because of that rating, you can start to trust the quality of the products without trust any particular person. So there are many ways to mitigate the trust issues. So I think the bigger problem is to make the world is not much more the information more digitized, but actually it's the trust environment with the information that will really improve the prospect of the people's collaboration and the opportunities. So I think that's the bigger exciting part. But let me come back to ask a question to Eric. So, if information economists and people with the mechanism design like you have thought a lot about to use the right mechanism to mitigate the asymmetric information problem. So from your sense, in our daily activity, in any country or a region, to what extent how big is this asymmetric information problem? And I think how much hope you place on blockchain to mitigate this problem?
Well, first of all, I think asymmetric information is a huge problem. It's one of the fundamental barriers to successful transaction in the world. Asymmetric information is a major reason for inequality, because poor people, for example, can't get loans. Even if they have good ideas, they can't get loans to finance their education. They can't get loans to finance their entrepreneurial projects. Why? Because they can't put up the collateral, which is the old-fashioned device for dealing with asymmetric information. And so the poor stay poor, whereas the rich can get loans, so they get even richer. And so asymmetric information is a huge reason behind income inequality, which I think we would agree is one of the most severe problems the world faces today. One reason why I'm excited about blockchain is for exactly the reasons you were saying. It can help us fight the barriers created by asymmetric information. It will become easier for a poor entrepreneur to get a loan. And therefore the poor can catch up with the rich.
Professor Maskin, one of the downsides you mentioned with cryptocurrency was that it could undermine the effectiveness of central banks' monetary policies. But now that they're all setting up CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, in what way does that affect their monetary policy adjustments?
Well, I hope that the central bank digital currency will drive out private cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. That's my hope, because it except for the fact that Bitcoin fluctuates wildly in its value, and therefore is attractive to a certain kind of speculator, it's hard for me to see why anyone would want private cryptocurrency when they can do the same thing with government-backed digital currency. The original lure of Bitcoin was that you could transfer it easily, but you can transfer the public digital currency just as easily. So my wish is that Bitcoin and the other private cryptocurrencies will now disappear.
I don't think it will happen, but I actually agree with Eric that I don't believe blockchain, Bitcoin can replace the currency issued by the central banks for obvious reasons. There's a lack of the trust system behind this, the government's country's ability to all this. So it's very inefficient, and that's also the problem, disruption to the financial system. So I think Eric gave very good insights. And there are some people actually they would like to use the blockchains to store assets and to exchange to do the payment. And so in some areas across the world, the governments are taking notice. Central banks are taking notice of this of the cryptocurrencies. So they are trying to develop their own version of the cryptocurrencies. So that is a smarter version of the currency. And so the question here actually is, to what extent should they do this? Now, actually, in many countries, because it's becoming more and more cashless. So you already have the electronic money, actually they send to each other. But so when we talk about the governments, the central banks, digital currency, we're talking about a smarter version of the currency. It has memories, it has a lot more information, it do more things. So that is the question that whether we want this or not. For example, in the US government, the central bank, it can express the view that they're paying attention to this, but it might not be needed. Some other countries are moving ahead. So I think there's different experiments and views. If you ask me, I think that for any new blockchain applications to be successful, it has to solve some old pain point that was not solved before. So if the current, so we have to look at what this can be done. So I think one great thing that's the cryptocurrency or the central bank backed digital currency can really make a difference. Probably it's cross-border payment, and so there's a lot it's very inefficient. Because of the time and the efforts spent to verify all the identities, the lack of trust. Then so I think that can be much more improved. And so I think my point here is that if you only want, especially in areas with the very efficient payment, then it's the advantage of a new currency is not that obvious. But in the many areas that are obvious is a lack of efficiency and lack of trust in information. We spend too much efforts to verify the information. And those are the areas I think it can blossom. So I think but it's interesting to see that the different countries are exploring this, discussing this. So what's not converging yet, it's still very at the very frontier area.
But even so, I would predict that 20 years from now, all money will be electronic. It's very hard for me to see that that old-fashioned cash is going to persist for that much longer. This is a revolution like movable type. When movable type came along, the old-fashioned illuminated people said, we want to keep these old-fashioned illuminated manuscripts, and they survived for a little while, but ultimately movable type was just so much more efficient that it completely replaced the old technology. That I think is exactly what is going to happen with digital currency. It's going to drive out everything else.
It's almost certain that, in the future, we're getting into a cashless society. So I think that's what Eric is saying. But here is that when you have the central bank digital currency, we need to ask what is the relation with the current financial system. If you have, for example, if you do have account at the central bank, what is that relation with the financial institutions? And how does that support the actual financial and the real economic activities? So those are the things we need to sort things out. But a cashless society, that is clear,
Yep, I haven't used cash for a long time. Professor Maskin, I want to ask about smart contracts, because another Nobel laureate, Ronald Coase, had said firms exist to reduce or cut out transaction costs. And if smart contracts enabled by blockchain can actually make contracts execute better and also cut out transaction costs, then are companies still going to exist? I mean, are we going to have corporate functions like legal, like HR, or outsourced?
Well, that's actually a very interesting question. And I think, indeed, we should expect more functions of a firm to be outsourced through smart contracts, because again, if you solve the problem of trust, it's often more efficient to have these things done by people who specialize in them than for your own company to do it. So yes, I think we will expect more outsourcing. That I don't think, however, is going to mean the death of the firm. One important thing that a firm still brings is a brand name, a reputation. And even if the firm is having a lot of its function performed by outsiders, it still stands for something. It can still make sure that quality standards are held up to a certain level. And for example, if I want to acquire a beautiful suit, I'm going to turn to Armani. I'm just using it as an example of a brand that really means something to people. And even if Armani ends up having all of the manufacturing done outside of Italy, and they probably already do have most of the manufacturing done outside of Italy, they are still exercising quality control. And for that reason, the firm is not going to disappear anytime soon.
But won't quality control be outsourced as well?
No, the Armani people have a vision of what their quality means. It's very difficult to write in a contract, even a smart contract, exactly what quality, what attributes you're looking for. In the end, you have to be able to judge that for yourself. And so I don't think quality control itself can be outsourced.
Professor Chen? Do you think the fundamental structure of companies will change as a result of blockchain technology?
I think firm will exist for a long time. I don't see it be replaced by blockchain, but blockchain will change something. So in economists' view that a firm is a set of the contracts, but we know when we talk about smart contracts, we have to make this contractable, but a lot of contracts are incomplete. So that's why you think about in the firms, in an institution, we collaborate each other so many ways. We don't contract each individual thing. So there are so many things that cannot be contracted. That's why I also have ownership, because who have ownership will take what's left over. So we'll be ultimately responsible. So all those systems, mechanisms are designed to mitigate the incomplete contract problem with the right incentive. So I think that will exist, still continue to exist for a long time. But I do agree that for the things that can be clearly contracted, then if we have the blockchain that enable this to be trustworthy, plus it's smart, can be executed, it will make it much better. Let me give you a concrete example. Let's say Eric and I, we would like to sign a simple contract. Eric decides to lend me $100. And so we do that. Then I kind of refuse to pay the money back.
Pay back.
The problem is that it will be very hard for Eric to sue me on the court, because it will be so much costly. It's very costly to verify this whole thing, the contracts. So there's a lot of cheap contract in the informal contract. Actually, a crossroad, and people lend to each other, but it's very hard to, the cost of verify and execute the contract is very high. But if you make it smart, so let's say Eric and I, we wrote this contract based on blockchain. It has a smart contract, and at the due date, it will actually take the money from my account back to Eric, and or otherwise it will do other things if we agree with each other. So the cost of this verifying execution becomes very low. So even let's say we lend to each other, that's $5, that can be much more doable. So I think my point here is that for whatever that the goal is clear, it can be clearly contracted. The cost of verifying, executing this would be much easier. That can be outsourced a lot more across world. But at firms, there's so many precious things. We collaborate with each other. This is based on incomplete contracts. And so a lot of things, valuable things cannot be contracted. So that's why I think it will still exist. In fact, there's I think a lot of the collaboration, blockchain will really improve not only outsourcing, but actually really improve the collaboration between the institutions. And we call this the permissioned blockchain. So if we think about the Bitcoin, well, Bitcoin is open blockchain, so everybody can participate. We don't need to trust anybody. The problem of this is that anything, let's say Eric decides to send me 1 penny, we can spend, let's say, $20 to verify he does send me 1 penny. So a lot of miners, they do leave proof of work to prove that he does send me 1 penny. So it's so costly. Why is it so costly? Because everything needs to be verified. But when you have the institutions, you have this permissioned blockchain. So let's say we have 5 institutions. Then we decided to write our contracts, collaborations on blockchain. Then actually the verifying cost is very low. So in that sense, then, so it will much more improve the efficiency. Think about cross-border payment. Now, if you have to pay somebody, you go to a bank, banks go through the SWIFT system, so contacts the bank on the other side of the continent, then that bank contacts the person. So it goes through a chain of the institutions, and it takes time and money, efforts to verify every step is true. No. So, but now if you write this on the blockchain with a smart contract, then you can solve this instantly within seconds. So I think my point here is that blockchain with the smart contract will much more improve the efficiency and the collaboration between the institutions. It also have outsourcing, of course, but I think that's the future.
But in terms of bringing down costs for everyone, does this mean that blockchain will level the playing field for big companies with lots of resources and strong reputations, and smaller players that are relatively unknown with less resources? Professor Maskin?
Well, I was arguing before that blockchain can be a weapon against inequality. And so, yes, I think the gap between the rich and the poor, the big company and the little company, will be narrowed because blockchain will definitely help the little guy and the poor person. It will not eliminate the gap completely, however, and that's where we come back to qualities that cannot be adequately captured in a contract. Long used the word uncontractable. I use the example of quality. Quality is not a fully definable term. If it were, you could put it into the contract and you could outsource it. But exactly why an Armani suit is so appealing cannot be completely specified in a contract. And so big companies that have a reputation for producing something of a particular quality will continue, even in a blockchain world, to have an advantage. Reputation for quality is valuable, and it's not going to disappear just because of this new technology.
What do you think, Professor Chen? That it will
Yeah,
reduce inequality and also quality is not going to be outsourced?
yeah, I agree with both points. I think the first point is the ability to reduce inequality is the most exciting part of the blockchain, and it's precisely the little guys who do not have trust. They do not have enough information. The world do not trust them enough, so they do not have enough opportunities. So I think that's and the blockchain, the information, and people will make them much more trustworthy. So they will get more help and opportunities. So I think that's the exciting part. Another part is that precisely, and what we witness in the digital revolution is that it's very unlike the previous technological revolutions. It's not really just trickling down. Nowadays, the most active users of the digital technology, the average Joes, look at in China or across the world, so the average people, they are very active users because the cost of producing and sharing information is so low. So I think we are using the digital technology actually to make a lot more people to participate, to have the opportunities to collaborate, and the blockchain will further strengthen this trend in a fundamental way.
Let's talk about conveying information or signaling. So blockchain doesn't eliminate signaling because the unobserved ability is off-chain and the observed proxy educational degree is on-chain. So how does blockchain change the way people and business players do signaling, which is conveying information? Professor Maskin?
Well, again, I think blockchain has the potential for reducing, but not completely eliminating signaling. So at the moment, one important form of signaling is, if I'm trying to get you to lend me money, I take certain actions, not because they are particularly productive actions, but because they help convince you that I'm trustworthy. So people burn up a lot of capital just trying to persuade other people that they can be trusted. Blockchain, for all the reasons we've said, can dramatically that kind of signaling. But
So you don't need fancy skyscrapers and offices anymore?
exactly. You don't need to put on a show to
Right.
to convince people that you're worthy of their investment money. So that's all to the good, but as both Long and I have already mentioned, there are certain things that cannot be contracted and probably will never be contracted. And for those things, such as quality, signaling will continue. If I'm Armani and I want to convince you that I'm keeping up my quality standards, I may have to do a certain amount of advertising. I may have to put on fashion shows. There will be many activities that I will have to pursue, not because they're valuable in themselves, but because they will convince you that my quality has not deteriorated. That sort of signaling, I think, will persist, but many of the most obvious kinds of signaling can be eliminated.
Do you have anything to add, Professor Chen?
Yeah, I think this is a very, very interesting point, and I agree. The point of signaling is to buy trust, to make all kinds of efforts to let people trust you. But now with the blockchain, which have so much potential to mitigate the asymmetric information, so that maybe in the future people will spend more efforts to do the right kind of signaling. It's not just try to really to convince people I'm good, but actually to show why I'm good, in addition to the information you already know. And I think also, but it doesn't really, it cannot solve all the signaling problem, because some of signaling actually has particular objectives. For example, some of them is trying to connect to the right kind of the consumers, customers with the similar preference of the quality or the content, etc. So, but the point here is that it will mitigate the problem, a challenge of doing so much signaling. It probably will make the companies to do the or the individuals to do the right kind of signaling, and not wasting money and efforts. So I think that's good.
Professor Chen, how have you seen blockchain technology help us in the pandemic?
I think technology can do a lot of things. For example, let's say if we are fortunate to produce the vaccine quick enough, so we have to get most of the people across the world to get the vaccine. So if we have, let's say, a blockchain system that can record and to tell who got the vaccine, who already got infected, recovered, all this, so that can and that information is trustworthy, and that I think help a lot to bring back the trust of the producers, of the consumers, get the economic activity back to normal. I think that is important, especially for the poorer countries right now. They're suffering because they do not have enough technology to identify, to measure and isolate the infected people, nor do they have enough ability to resist the economic shocks. So I think technology can help them a lot. But let me emphasize lastly that it doesn't mean you have to, blockchain can be designed in such a way it can protect your privacy. You think about it's like those chains, it has keys. So we only open to check, verify the necessary information. Otherwise, it's under the good privacy production. So with the right blockchain technology, with the right design, so it can protect the privacy of the information. In the meantime, it can make the information much more trustworthy and can circulate. That can, I think, this is precisely the world we desperately needed. I was hoping, let's imagine blockchain was developed much earlier, so years back. So right now, we probably would have much better mechanism across the world to restore the trust between the people. So this is a good example to see that we need right governance, we need right coordination, and a technology, a trust technology that can be so much more useful in such a world.
And as we are coming to the end of our online segment, I just want to ask you you mentioned a lot of applications for which blockchain has potential. Which one are you looking forward to the most in the short term?
I think there are many ways. Wherever you're going to find a lot of the lack asymmetric information combined with the lack of trust, then I think it will be very useful. Obviously, finance is a very important area because the finance is the information-based service. Most of the small and micro companies, individuals, they do not get the financial support because there's a lack of trust and it's asymmetric information. So I think that will be, it's much needed. And for example, another example is in finance is cross-border payment. So you spend so much, let's say you are a Filipino nanny working in another country. So you can pay cost you up to like 8-10%, to send money back to your country, and that's a crime. And so technology can do much better to help those people, and also it can make the contracts, smart contract, the contracts much more trustworthy and executable. Even a small amount of only involve the small amount of money, it can much more mitigate the supply chain problem. Make the products much more trustworthy. We can trace back, verify the resources, and we can, through the whole collaboration and the financing across the supply chain. So it's just so much more, it's going on in so many more areas in addition to just the Bitcoin or the currency so far. So that's really exciting. Yeah, make the world much more trustworthy. It's coming.
Power of blockchain. All right. Well, thank you. Let me just sum up some of your highlights. You've talked about the beauty of blockchain technology, the privacy, the efficiency advantages, the wide application potential, and how public digital currencies can ensure our economies do not slip into economic crises. You talked about the fact that more functions of companies can be outsourced, but the firm structure will stay. That's thanks to the power of smart contracts, and also how blockchain can be a powerful tool to reduce inequality. And the two applications that our two guests are most eagerly awaiting, one is in voting for Professor Maskin, and also in finance, especially cross-border payments for Professor Chen. Thank you for your time, Professor Maskin, joining us from Boston. Thank you, Professor Chen.
非常感谢两位嘉宾的精彩分享，也感谢程雷女士的主持。今天这样一场思想盛宴呢，是需要观众认真的去理解和思考的。坦率的说，区块链技术和理论框架不是一个容易理解的领域，但正是由于攀登不易，所以当我们追随学术大师的引导，登上认知的高峰，才能感受到那种一刹那间感悟的愉悦。最后，再次感谢两位嘉宾，给我们带来了区块链学术最前沿的思考。我们下周四下午2点不见不散。